Freedom Misses and Assassin's Kisses. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is uh, April the 30th, 2021. And on this date in history in 1582, they changed the calendar from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. This reset everything because they didn't include leap years. And so instead of it being on April 1st, being January the 1st, a couple months later, whenever it actually does get to be that time, they found people were still celebrating New Year's 3 months later. And so they referred to them as April's Fools. So April Fool's Day goes back to this time period. So happy April Fool's Day, everybody, even though I'm going to talk about it later. But they actually changed the calendar on this date. Well, they plan to change the calendar. This is when they made the decision. Enjoy it while you can.
Okay. Escobedo versus Illinois. The accused has a right to an attorney during police questioning. Okay. Look at the cartoon on the left. I want my lawyer. Sure thing, but first we arrange for you to spend some quality time chit-chatting with your co-defendant. So basically they could brutalize you and you'd have to sit there until you agreed to whatever they're trying to get you to agree to. Mapp versus Ohio in 1961. Unlawfully seized evidence is inadmissible at trial. Okay, so if you are in the car and the police pull you over and they say, "Hey, we want to see in your trunk," unless they have reasonable cause or probable cause, they cannot interfere. They can't just go looking through your car. Now, if you have a mound of cocaine in the back seat, or a bunch of guns, and you're under the age of 18 or under the age of 21, depending on what type of gun it is, then they can search the rest of your car for anything else you might be hiding. But you know, if you didn't have any cause, they opened up your trunk and they found, a mountain of cocaine and a bunch of machine guns, then they could arrest you. But the fact that they didn't have probable cause to go in there, you're not there smoking a marijuana cigarette and blowing smoke into their face. Uh, they can't just go search through your car. So realize you do have rights. Just don't be a jerk about it, because then you can inspire someone to try and find out why you're being such a big jerk. Abington School District versus Shemp. Bible reading in school is banned. That doesn't mean that you as a student couldn't read the Bible in school if you wanted to. It's just that the district as a whole cannot force you to do it, uh, or lead you in any type of Bible study. Now, it is possible to have a class over like the Old Testament and New Testament, but uh, you're teaching it as historical documents instead of as uh, religion. Griswold versus Connecticut. Sorry about all these court cases. I know they're boring, but we still got to do them. Griswold versus Connecticut. Banning birth control violates constitutional privacy rights. You should not have the right to find out, you know, as far as the government, who is and who isn't taking birth control. So, moving on to that, let's move to Gideon versus Wainwright, a man who brutally murders someone, but accidentally gives away information because he does not have an attorney present. He couldn't afford an attorney, so he gets a kind of raw deal. Uh, so, because of this, you get a court appointed attorney if you're a felony suspect. And that is if you can't afford one on your own. Miranda versus Arizona. This is where if the police pull you over and they're going to arrest you, they have to Mirandize you. Okay. Uh, You are under arrest. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, then an attorney will be provided for you. Okay. By the way, just FYI, if you get pulled over, uh, and they put you in the squad car and they haven't read you your rights, this does not mean it's time for you to say, "Hey, I totally killed the guy over there, and I hid I hid my gun in a trash can 2 miles from here at exit 53." Okay, they actually do not have to Mirandize you until they formally question you. They can ask questions at the scene of what's going on. So if you're in the squad car and you just start giving away all the secrets, well, be careful, okay? Because they can go, "Oh crap, what went on back there?" And then you're like, "Oh," and all the information I just said a minute ago. Anyway, that can be used against you. Okay, Cuba, 1959. Fidel Castro took over Cuba with Soviet national took over Cuba with the help of Soviet weapons. Okay, uh, there was a guy in charge there by the name of Batista who's friendly to the U.S. There were a lot of U.S. businesses all throughout Cuba, a lot of casinos, a lot of investments. All of the U.S. businesses became part of the Cuban national government. So Eisenhower, in response, gets a bunch of these Cuban exiles that escaped to the United States, to places like Florida, Miami, New Orleans, and New York. He'll train these men. They were called La Brigada, or the Brigade, and he wanted to launch an invasion of Cuba and basically overthrow Fidel Castro. This doesn't get done before the end of Eisenhower's presidency, and so one of the first things that happens whenever JFK becomes president is they launch this attack on the Bay of Pigs. There's the Bay of Pigs down there on the southern beach. It was called the Bay of Pigs because there were a bunch of pigs in that beach area. They were laying out on the beach and they were bacon. Ha 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 ha. So they launched this major attack. They thought it would catch everyone by surprise and that all the Cuban people would get behind the attack. The U.S. was supposed to send air cover to establish a beachhead to make it possible for them to make it more easily into Havana and overthrow Fidel Castro, but most of La Brigada were either killed or captured. Many of them sat in jails until they died for about the next 35 years. So this makes JFK look bad.
The Freedom Rides. So in 1961, the Congress of Racial Equality, also known as CORE, led by James Farmer, asked for teams of African Americans and white Americans to desegregate interstate bus terminals. This is something that had already been ruled by the Supreme Court as being protected, and they were just trying to test to make sure that this was being done. And so teams throughout all of the South began to, go through and try and integrate these bus terminals, and violence breaks out. It's worst in Mississippi, and Mississippi Senator Eastland actually agrees to stop the violence if he was allowed to arrest the Freedom Riders. And Kennedy agreed to this, and this allowed them to not be murdered by a mob. And some of the stories about them being chased into parking garages and just beaten completely out of sight. And then eventually what would happen is they got a warning that the police were called, and then all of the mob broke away and left them. James Meredith. Now, this is an African American Air Force veteran, and after he gets out of and finishes his duty in the Air Force, he decides he's going to go to college at the University of Mississippi, and the governor will go there and physically block him from being able to go to class. JFK is going to call in 500 federal marshals to escort him to campus so that he can go to class there. And this crazy riot breaks out, and uh, uh, just all types of hillbillies are running in with guns on their trucks and are, have them mounted up on the backs of the cabs driving through campus, shooting wildly, trying to get James Meredith, who the day of the riot was not actually on campus. He was safely in a hotel room with a pretty heavy guard around him. 160 marshals were wounded in this attack. And from this point forward, JFK sent in the army to escort Meredith until he graduated. In 1963, James Meredith starts what's called the March Against Fear. He wanted to march across the state of Mississippi to protest the treatment of African Americans in the state. On the first day, he was shot in the leg. As soon as he was shot in the leg, though, the march was continued by Stokely Carmichael of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. By the way, the violence didn't stop there. They were actually attacked at one point by the police, who tear gassed them. The Cuban Missile Crisis. This is the closest that the world has ever come to complete and total destruction. U.S. spy planes had found that there were nuclear missiles long-range nuclear missiles in Cuba. These are nuclear missiles that could be launched, and within about 20 minutes they could hit Florida. Within about 30 minutes they could hit as far away as Washington or Dallas, and within an hour they could hit almost any place in the United States except for the state of Washington and Oregon. JFK put a blockade around Cuba, and he threatened massive retaliation, which means that we would launch every one of our nuclear weapons if the Soviets did anything. So for 13 days we were on the brink of complete and total annihilation. And Americans knew it. Americans knew that, it was going to be a short period of time before everyone was dead. War was averted because of three major actions. Number one, the U.S. did not invade Cuba. Number two, the U.S. removed our missiles from Turkey. Turkey is closer to the Soviet Union than Cuba is to the United States, believe it or not. And number three, the Soviets removed their missiles from Cuba. Now, in later interviews, Fidel Castro said he would have never launched them against the United States. That what he would have done is, whenever our forces landed, he would have used the nuclear weapons to wipe out U.S. forces in Cuba. There was fallout of this. Nikita Khrushchev, who had been in charge since Stalin died, he was actually given the post because he ran Stalingrad during World War II. And he loses power after the Cuban Missile Crisis and is replaced by a man by the name of Leonid Brezhnev. And Brezhnev will be in power until about 1980. So for the better part of about 17 years, Brezhnev is in charge. During this time, we did find it important not to always have to threaten, massive retaliation, launching all of our nuclear weapons. So they came up with a new policy called flexible response. And this is a buildup of conventional weapons and troops. So you didn't have to annihilate the planet every time there was a problem, which was kind of a benefit. You never want to kill everyone on Earth. Okay, you usually don't want to kill everybody on Earth. I'll go with that. So, the United States had formed West Germany into a country in 1948. They had averted losing West Berlin to the Soviets in 1948 to 1949 as well, with the airlift done under Truman. But the Soviets grew weary of JFK not recognizing East Germany as a nation and not withdrawing the troops from Berlin. So Khrushchev builds a wall through Berlin separating the two zones. 2.8 million East German citizens had escaped to the west side, about 1 out of 6 people in eastern Germany during the time period of 1945 to 1962, whenever the wall was built. Once the wall is built, if you went near the wall within about 20 feet of it for any reason whatsoever, they shot you. If you tripped, they shot you. If someone pushed you, they shot you, and probably shot the person that pushed you as well. There was no question, there was nothing to give you any chance to try and redeem what you've done. And this wall will stand for the next 27 years. It was a sign of oppression. Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson is the mother of the environmental movement in the United States. And she writes the book Silent Spring. And basically, this is a very long book to read. It has a lot of analysis in it. And if you understand how to read a lot of charts and graphs, this might be a good book for you. But the whole gist of the book is, if we continue to use pesticides on nature and the environment, that the springs will be silent because everything will be dead. DDT, the way that it works, is it kills insects and other bugs on contact. This is something that they found that after World War I, with 95% of the people in the trench, or 97% of the people in the trenches getting lice, that if you put DDT in their hair, it killed all the lice on contact. And they used DDT for a long time because of how effective it was. Now the problem was, if it kills it that instantly, shouldn't it have an effect on people? And that was the one thing that they didn't keep in mind. And so they used this all over the United States to try and kill off mosquitoes, to try and kill off fire ants. And what this has done instead is it has bred a more resistant mosquito, and it killed off the red ants more than it killed off the fire ants, and it's made things a lot worse. They still spread DDT. In fact, they did it in district, I want to say around 2018, and anytime that they tell you not to go outside until afternoon because they just sprayed, that is when they're using DDT. It causes cancer. So, feminism had started to die out in the 1950s, mainly because they didn't have a strong leader to lead the movement. And feminism itself is a belief that men and women should be treated equally economically, politically, and socially. And during World War II, a lot of women had joined the nation's workforce. But whenever the war had ended and everyone came home, then many women lost their jobs to returning veterans. But this had changed in a short period of time, and by 1960, women were nearly 1/3 of the workforce in the United States. Betty Friedan. She was very important to the women's movement in the 1960s. She wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique. And this talked about how there had been several movements to keep women from going into important roles in education, business, and government. They also, a lot of the research that she did was based on Smith College graduates, were women that went to college, and they went to college just to become a housewife, and as an opportunity to have a better read and better educated woman to marry. She also forms the National Organization of Women, or NOW, and this demands greater educational opportunities for women, and also the exclusion of women from all types of political positions and professions that have been done for a long time. About this time, they introduced this short story where Mr. Gibbs and his son are driving home. Are driving home. They crash off of a bridge, and Mr. Gibbs is killed instantly. His son is still alive and is rushed to the airport. And when they're taking the son into surgery, the doctor says, "I can't operate on him. He's my son." And a lot of people came up with a lot of different theories on how that was possible. And eventually, what had happened was you understand that the doctor was a woman. And if that was something that you had a hard time understanding, that showed just how sexist that you were. So in early November of 1963, MLK leads 200,000 demonstrators to the Capitol for a peaceful rally. This is a march of African Americans, white Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans. And the march was actually led by A. Philip Randolph, who had tried to do the same thing in the 1940s. And this is where MLK gives his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Wo-Din Jim. Wo-Din Jim was the leader of South Vietnam whenever Vietnam was broken into two places following following the creation of North Vietnam. So North Vietnam was under Ho Chi Minh, and it was communist. Wo-Din Jim was in charge of South Vietnam. He was pro-Western, anti-communist, and he was Catholic. So it seems like this would make him really close to Kennedy, who was also Catholic. But the fact that he discriminated against Buddhism and didn't allow an election to unify Vietnam, JFK is going to allow him eventually to be assassinated. So he removes all the protection, and they go in, they kill Jim, and they kill his brother. Now, due to the discrimination against the Buddhist, a monk goes into the middle of the road, covers himself in gasoline, sits down quietly, begins to meditate as he sets himself on fire. And he will violently burn to death in plain view of everyone in the city. It is videotaped, and there is a photograph of the man on fire right there. At no point does he begin to scream. He continues to chant and stay at peace as he's burning himself to death. This is something that was copied in 2005 as well, and we'll talk about that here at the end of the next unit. As a result of the lack of an election to unify Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh is going to create the Viet Cong to reunify Vietnam. And again, this leads to JFK allowing Jim's assassination. And ironically, he dies within 2 weeks of... JFK dies within a few weeks of Jim being assassinated. Sorry about the foreshadowing there. But this takes us to November 22nd, 1963. JFK was in Dallas trying to get some support for his re-election bid. There was some thought that he was losing some support in the South, so he went on a whirlwind tour. And on this day, early in the morning, he was in Austin. Then later on in the day, or the same morning, he was also in Fort Worth. And by noon of that day, he was in Dallas. And driving down Elm Street in Oak Cliff, passing the book depository building, he is hit by 2 bullets. The first one that goes through his throat, and the second one that goes through his head. There were a total of 3 shots fired, and the first one missed a car and hit an innocent bystander, and the other 2 hit Kennedy. In a quick amount of time, it was determined that Lee Harvey Oswald was the assassin, and he was captured within a few hours. He killed a police officer by the name of Tibbets within a few hours, and was caught in a movie theater and drug in. He was killed 2 days later while being transported in the basement of the police station by a man by the name of Jack Ruby, who had ties to the Chicago mob, Ruby said he killed Oswald because he didn't want Jackie to have to go through a trial. What you believe is up to you. Uh, there have been several. They've reopened the trial on this several different times to see, who's actually involved in this. Uh, anyway, the Warren Commission eventually is going to conclude that Oswald acted alone. And so, if there's a question on the test or on the STIR exam, the answer is that Oswald acted alone. Okay? So, I'm moving on. LBJ took over after JFK was killed. He was sworn in on the plane returning to Washington, D.C., just 2 hours after the assassination. During the swearing in ceremony, Jackie Kennedy was standing right beside him, still wearing her pink outfit that was bloodstained with parts of his brain and other assorted items. Whenever he takes over the presidency, he declares a war on poverty and Vietnam, and also promises to improve civil rights. He is reelected in 1964, and he runs against Barry Goldwater, who is bringing this new type of conservatism in. Okay, he wants to get rid of the income tax. He wants to get rid of entitlement programs like welfare. He wants to bomb Vietnam and sell the Tennessee Valley Authority. Anything that made the United States look like it was not a completely capitalist nation, he wanted to get done, and he wanted to be an imperial power. By the way, if you look on the left, you see the button "In Your Guts, You Know He's Nuts." This was not his button. That was one won war by the Democrats. So don't think that his own people were working against him on that. So this brings us to the end of yet another day. I hope everyone had a good day. We're getting really close to the end of another unit. We just have 2 more lessons after this one. So remember, don't cocaine, don't AIDS, and if you see anyone coveting, tell them to stop, then wash your hands and get away. Let's stay safe and healthy and happy. But if we have to choose, let's be healthy. We can be happy, if we're healthy later. But if we're not, then, anyway, be happy and healthy if you can. Advice.